I'm going to start out with the only book I have on tonight's review docket, and then we'll talk about some films. But if you remember, some months back, I guess now, I reviewed Shelley by Doug Brode, and it's a really cool sort of cyberpunk science fiction ish. It's I don't want to pigeonhole into one genre, but it's got all those elements in it. And this book knocked my socks off. I loved it. I just heard about the author from another video, and the premise of the book sounded so cool to me. She's a synthetic, not an android. They call them synthetics in this book and in this universe. And it's a future in which synthetics are a thing. There's robots for everything. There's house cleaning bots. There's sex bots. There's, I think I said nanny bots were one of the examples I give. Restaurant server bots and everything. But she is working in law enforcement, and she's a synthetic in charge of helping her team or whatever go after synthetics that go rogue. So whenever a synthetic would harm an organic, a human being, obviously, And it's a great story. I've talked a lot about it, and the sequel is coming out in the summer, June or July. I always get June and July mixed up. But Doug's going to be on the channel at the end of this month and talking about this book and the sequel and all of that good stuff. And it's open for pre-orders now. I've got the link in the description below. But before he wrote Shelley, he had written a trilogy of books called the Ship books. And obviously science fiction, you can see from the cover. These books really cool. Where's the Ship Revenge is one. I've read the first one. There's three of them. There's the Ship. There's the Ship's Revenge, which I'm talking about tonight, and then Children of the Ship, which is the third one. I haven't read the Children of the Ship yet. That's gonna come here this summer. But talking about the Ship's Revenge was the second one, and if you can go back and watch the review I did of the Ship, it's very much science fiction, but it's also a lot of horror involved. I mean, it's a terrifying tale. I mean, you really get into it, and it's I don't want to give so much away. Basically, this is kind of a good setup for what this book's about in particular, the second one. There are different theories when it comes to aliens, UFOs, even like real life conspiracy theories about Area 51 and so forth. There's the idea that that they're aliens coming from another universe or whatever, or not universe, another galaxy or whatever. There's the theory that they're coming from the inside the Earth, because a lot of UFOs appear like out of the water or something like that. So there's a hollow Earth kind of theory that ties into UFO. And then there's the theory that it's actually time travel involved. Like these are maybe future humans or beings or whatever from the future coming back somehow to our time period because of a lot of the timey-wimey dilations things that a lot of abduction experiences are described as and stuff, and other reasons too. This trilogy, I don't want to give too much away about the trilogy because I think you should read it. It's really good, especially if you like a little sci-fi / horror. But I can't really talk about the Ship's Revenge without saying that these books do deal with the time travel theory of UFOs. That's all I'll say. I won't go any farther into it. But that's enough to give you the setup that this book actually takes place in the 50s. And we still have one of our main characters, Casey Stevens. And it's when you see how the book one ends, one of the things about this trilogy, and this is the case with this book too, that each of the stories, at least so far, the first two, they all sufficiently close a chapter on a story arc, but not in any way are all of your questions answered. It's very much obviously a chapter in a bigger story. And hopefully I'll be able to say by the time I read The Children of the Ship that okay, this is a great end. It's all, but I haven't read that yet. So I can say though that thus far, we've got our part two of the trilogy. So very sort of Empire Strikes Back-ish, the Ship's Revenge, the ship, some bad things happen to our characters that we like. And there's a blow dealt, but it's really fun to be back in the 1950s. I like the way he handled the 1950s because it wasn't, sometimes writers who go back to the 50s in particular, that's one of the things. If I was ever writing a book in the 50s, I'd be more tempted to really write with this sort of fun, rose-colored atomic punk age, glasses on, because I just love that 50s aesthetic and what we thought the future would look like in the 50s. I just love that. I love the 50s aesthetic or whatever. He doesn't do that, but he also doesn't do the opposite, which is like, the 50s, things were terrible. Men were all terrible to women and everybody was racist. He doesn't do that either. I wasn't alive in the 50s, but he gives what I would imagine is a pretty good, fair representation of the time period and of the people in it. Obviously, you deal with a lot of military people in it because of the nature of the story and what's going on in it. But Casey Stevens, you're invested in her character from you read the first novel. You like what she's going through. You like how she's trying to survive and the journey that she's on, trying to fight for survival, fight for whatever she's fighting, humankind, whatever. Again, I'm not giving too much away, but in the book, and these books aren't too long too. So I mean, if you're kind of scared, like, oh no, a trilogy, I don't know if I really want to dig into a big, huge. I mean, all of the books. I've got all three of them here, and I'll hold them up for you. They're all generally the same size-ish there. In fact, I think the number of the first one, the ship, is even just a little bit bigger than the other two. So it's it's easy. Plus, they're all on Audible, and some really decent readings on Audible. It took me to be honest, I read part of the first one, I think, and then I read a chapter or two of this one on Audible, driving, just trying to supplement the reading in. And the narrator took me a little bit of getting used to at first. It's the same writer, at least it does the first two. I haven't checked on the third one, but took me. Sometimes it takes you a little bit of time to get used to the cadence of somebody's voice, and but you can change the speed if you want. I hate doing that. I always like to keep the speed of the reader exactly as the reader would speak, because that's kind of a performance, right? I don't turn a song speed, notch it up just so I can hurry up and get through it. That's crazy. I want to hear the But anyway, it is it's an Audible copy of it too, if that's what you prefer. But some interesting things about this book. There's a question I want to ask the author when he's on the channel. So again, The Ship's Revenge by Doug Brode, as you see there. It's a novel, and he uses omniscient third-person perspective narrator. Okay, so that's pretty typical with a lot of these, especially these genre novels where you've got an omniscient narrator, meaning that the narrator is not one of the characters. So we're not using first person. Then I did this, then I did that. It's a third person, unnamed narrator. And omniscient, meaning that this narrator isn't just fixed and detached to one character. So your narrative perspective, you do have narrative perspective. So in certain chapters, the narration will be fixed to Casey Stevens, and you're kind of just on her shoulder, so to speak. It's called third person attached. But it's still omniscient in that this book travels through different narrators. And that's always fascinated me, because I'm more of a short story writer. I've got a novel that I've tried for years to try and get through or whatever, but it's even that I just bounce forth between two perspectives. But a lot of great novels, will pick 3, 4. Like I'm rereading some of the Rogue Squadron books now, and you got like 4 perspectives that you'll jump into, and you need certain perspectives. You can't, as a writer, you can't back up all the way just to a detached omniscient narration, because then it feels like you're narrating a fairy tale. You do have to kind of zero in and be attached to a certain character for a certain period of times. That helps the readers grow attached to the character. It helps the writing go into their interiority, go into their mindsets, and talk about what's motivating them, what they think of these people and that people. And you do have to kind of stick to one person's perspective when you're there. You can't talk about what Casey's thinking and then jump over and talk about what this person's thinking about her too. It's just, that's too much. That's too all-knowing of a narrator. It breaks tension. It breaks suspense and whatnot. So we've got Casey's perspective. You've got Donovan's perspective. Well, pretend I didn't say that. You've got this other character's perspective, who makes sense that he'd be his perspective. There's an employee of Casey's that the book you meet in the very beginning, in the opening. It makes sense that you'd be in his perspective. And then, if I'm correct, I might be missing one, but we have one more character's perspective, McClellan, and I want to say Colonel McClellan, but he might have been a general. But anyway, he's this general who's in the time period of the 50s there, and he's a great character. You first meet him through Casey Stevens' eyes, and you kind of think, okay, is he going to be just sort of a typical hard-ass military guy who's going to give her trouble or give her guff? But you actually get in his perspective at a point and you come to really like, oh, this is an interesting character. He's fleshed out, and I like, you know, this and that. But he's not as it's important to be in his perspective to find out some things that are happening that only he's privy to. You know, you need those scenes narrated, and then you jump back to the main characters, you know, but McClellan isn't as, he doesn't feel as integral to the entire book as these other three characters do. And I don't think this is a problem. This isn't a critique of the book. I'm just finding it interesting as a reader who thinks about how books are constructed. I like to ask authors about, you know, what made you decide on these characters to be your perspectives going in? What made you think about these characters? Because McClellan's a great choice. And looking back on it now, I can't see anybody else that it should have been for that narrative perspective. You know, you can also go to where, if you've read novels, maybe you didn't even know that this was the problem, but it just started to feel like too much. That's usually where you've been in way too many people's heads. The narration has just jumped in so many people's perspectives that it just gets annoying and it's hard to keep up with, you know, at one point. So you know, there are a lot of conscious decisions that writers have to make. So, you know, I'm curious about, you know, that, and this one handled that very well. I think the only critique I have of it, and this is just sort of my own initial response. I'd be curious to hear, if you guys read this, actually tell me what you think. In fact, I really do recommend you guys read these. Well, first, if you haven't read any of these, pick up Shelley, so you can read the sequel that's coming out, because that's the most immediate stuff. But the Ship's Revenge books are great, and I recommend you check them out. If you do read the Ship's Revenge, I would like to hear your feedback on this too. There's a villain in the book, and this isn't spoiling anything, because you know he's a villain right when you meet him. His name is Pruitt, government bureaucrat, typical everything you can't stand about, you know, government bureaucracy and whatnot. And this is in the 50s, and his driving motivation is he's against communism, right? Again, it makes sense in the 50s, the whole Cold War going on. Communism is the big threat. That's what governments are going to be, you know, thinking about and whatnot. And he's in some ways, he's more worried about communism than he is about the alien or possible future kind of threats. Again, kind of makes sense, you know, how visceral and how immediate communism was back in the day. And that was okay. I was fine with that. I didn't really, you know, I didn't need his motivation fleshed out any more than that. I kind of accepted him as a government heavy, you know, kind of myopically fixated on what's the pressing near threat. That was fine. Then we get a little bit more of Pruitt's character motivation and backstory, and we find out something about his father and something that happened with his communist spy or whatever. And I actually felt like that little piece of extra motivation in Pruitt, I guess it just, like, I was okay with his motivation being government guy in the 50s, terrified of communism, you know, maybe he's seeking power or whatever, you know, he was just a great villain like that. That little extra piece, it kind of, I didn't like having to think about him wanting revenge for his father. Like that was almost, I don't know. That was I'm sure there's more to the story, and hey, maybe we'll find out more to the story in book 3. I don't know. But, you know, I'm just looking through the book and thinking, okay, what can I say though? If I had one criticism, if I had something that maybe, you know, if it was a script given to me or a manuscript given to me, you know, I would say, hey, flesh this out here or whatever. That might be the one little thing I would say, is that I didn't like that part of his motivation. If you're going to give us that part, flesh it out more and give us, you know, more of it. But I didn't even think it needed it. I think he's a great villain. I think fearing communism itself was its own. But it's a great setup, and it does what a sequel to a trilogy should do. It very much makes me want to go read the third one now. You know, a lot of writers who talk to me about the series that they're trying to, you know, map out in their mind, multi-book series, it seems like such a no-brainer, but so many writers don't get the balance of, you need a coherent arc, but you also need a cliffhanger. And you can't just write to the next cliffhanger. You got to resolve certain amount of things. I mean, same thing if you're doing chapters in a novel. You got to resolve certain things. You got to feel like you've got a nice, you know, good arc, but then you've got to turn that page, make the reader want to turn that page and get into the next book. So very much does the ending is like, oh crap, I was going to read this book later in the summer, but now I'm going to have to read it a little sooner. So The Children of the Ship is the next one. And yeah, I recommend these, especially if you like a little bit of horror, science fiction with a little touch of horror. Definitely pick them up. They're great. But we're going to have Doug on, if all goes well, unless anything happens, he has to cancel or whatever. And we're going to talk about the books. We're going to talk about Shelley, the master. Shelley, shoot, what was the name of the sequel? I don't know. It's in there. I got the link in the description. Shelley, it's not Mastermind. Shelley something mind. Maybe I don't know. Blanking on the moment here. But the next Shelley's coming out, and it's on his Amazon search results page if you click that link in the description. So check those out. Very fun stuff. And, because I talk about classic, and we're going to talk about classic movies here in a second, and I talk about classic comic reviews, but this is an example of something that Murder Mind. Thank you, Ohaz. Yeah, Shelley Murder Mind. This is an example of something that's being written now. New books that are coming out. There is new content. Even though I'm very hesitant to try out new content. Be it books, movies, comics, whatever. But there is new stuff that's being created that's really worth looking into. So I think it's important to support those as well. Even if you think maybe I'd like it, maybe I wouldn't, give it a chance. It's new content that's really well written, really well crafted. So I recommend those. I'm definitely going to read Shelley Murder Mind as soon as that comes out. Got my copy. I need to get that pre-ordered. I thought I already pre-ordered it, but I got to pre-order because you can pre-order these, and pre-ordering really helps, guys. New authors, any new author that you are trying to support, somebody that you like their work, pre-ordering helps, especially authors who don't have the, this isn't back in the day when you got the huge weight of Simon and Schuster behind you, or publishing companies or whatever. Because pre-orders go and they count as sales of that first day's sales. And the first day's sales helps that book rate and rankings and stuff like that. So pre-orders really do help the authors of books of authors that you want to support. So do check out the pre-orders. Again, the link for Doug Brode's books are in the description below. You can pre-order Shelley Murder Mind, and I'll be reading that when it comes out.